Welcome to the Thresholds of Reality, the podcast where we explore unexplained and mysterious events, phenomena, and legends. Today we're talking with Dr. Jim Segala, PhD, a serious scientist with a penchant for finding himself investigating the paranormal and strange phenomena, not only on this planet, but on many others. Strap in as we explore the edges of the unknown. Dr. Segala, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate you taking the time to talk with us and our audience.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We'll probably have some live viewers dropping in to ask a few questions here and there, and I'm sure you'll be able to handle them without any trouble whatsoever. To start out, we know that you've got a PhD in physics. You've got some advanced degrees in engineering, and one of the things that I find fascinating is learning about kind of the bona fides and the day jobs of folks who come on our program, and then how it is that they wound up in places like Skinwalker Ranch. So why don't you start by telling us about how you picked physics as your profession?
So I really didn't start as a physicist. I started as an engineer. So I spent probably 20 to 25 years of my life as an engineer, building things for people, giving people what they wanted to do to use in their professions. And so at some point along the way, actually when my kids graduated college, I said, I really want to go back and become a scientist. I was an engineer for all these years. I want to become a scientist. So that's when I went back and I got a PhD in physics. Now, while I was in physics, I said, I really want to do something that is beneficial to the community, not so much just, being a physicist or something like that. So I kind of went down the road of medical physics or biological physics because I work in the cancer area and I wanted to solve problems in the cancer area, do research in that area. So I kind of tailored a lot of what I did to the way the biology or the way energies interact with the biologies of the human body. So that put me in a very interesting position where I could analyze a situation and come back with ideas of how certain people may have gotten hurt or how things manifest in people's bodies that would not normally manifest, but you might be finding it out in some outskirts of Utah where people were getting hurt. So that kind of led me to the point where, after I graduated, I was very fortunate to be able to hook up with a gentleman by the name of Hal Puthoff, who is a very well-known physicist in I would say not pseudoscience, but in the fringe science. And he had a lab that he ran out of Austin, Texas. So I joined him there. And it turns out that Hal Puthoff was the science director for Bob Bigelow when he had when he owned Skinwalker Ranch, a long time ago, and he was Hal Puthoff was he was chairman of his science committee. So and I worked for Hal. So that's how I really got into that whole physics part. And then there was a situation that arose on the ranch or around the ranch in the area of the ranch that they were very puzzled by, and that's when Hal they came to Hal and said, can you give me some scientists that can come and figure out what happened to this unfortunate gentleman? And I was put on the team. So that was my original involvement with that whole area, the Utah, the Uinta Basin. It was my first involvement of anything that was like out of the ordinary. Before that, everything was very rational. I had projects that made sense, that, it was mainstream, but that was the first delve into like, okay, well, I don't know what the hell's going on here. I'm going to really have to figure this thing out. So
what was the actual event that you're just like, what is going, like, you just were like, okay, this doesn't make sense. Like, what is going on?
Well, the whole thing, I'm sure you've heard a lot of people talk about the scientific process. The scientific process states that you don't make assumptions. You go through and you have, very defined steps. You incrementally make discoveries, and you act upon those, and you get to the point you say, okay, well, at the end of that road, you're going to say, okay, well, here's the answer. Well, unfortunately, or fortunately, we made this investigation, and I was with a bunch of other scientists, I mean, very, very high level scientists. And we got to the point where I think it was almost 8 months into the investigation, we all looked at each other and said, I have no idea what's going on here. So now you have to start looking at other things. You say, well, or this poor gentleman got radiation, and typically a heavy dose of radiation, very fast moving radiation for a very short period of time in an area of the country where there is no linear accelerators, there is nothing going on. And so you have to scratch your head and say, okay, well, how can you possibly make an assumption that it was a radiation caused injury, but not have a source of radiation available to you to say, well, this is where it came from? So that's when we started to look in other places besides, our normal technologies and availabilities of radiation sources, and say, well, is this something that came from other parts of the, off planet? So that's where I started thinking about, okay, well, if this person did get hurt like this so terribly, is it possible that it came from someplace other than terrestrial?
Oh yeah, so that's where your inquiry took you. One of the things so I watched the first season of Secrets at Skinwalker Ranch,
Sure.
and one of the things I found really frustrating about that season was the unwillingness to pursue lines of inquiry. No digging. There were caves. No one would go in the caves because of safety concerns. And as a viewer, it's like, okay, well, if you're not willing to pursue the lines of inquiry, then you're not going to get any answers. What were some of those safety concerns that were so prohibitive on those lines of inquiry?
So that's interesting. When I first walked into that situation with these people, they're not scientists. Well, Travis is an excellent scientist, but everybody else there's not scientists. So they think very planar. So they think that Skinwalker Ranch was just this patch of dirt that had some things going on. But I tried to explain to them that it was deep down. It's the phenomena could be coming from well below the surface or well above the surface. So, and we have to explore the entire region of what we're looking at. We can't just walk around and expect to find something laying on the ground that says, made on Alpha Centauri.
Right.
It has to be something that is, we're going to have to dig down, and we're going to have to go into caves. We're going to have to instrument things. We're going to have to send things up in the air and stuff like that. And it was, maybe it was because this show was run by people that were not really in the science mode, that they, made it more dramatic and less of a science show. So that was a frustration for me as well. And we did overcome that quite a bit, but I think to this day, there's still a lot of trepidation about doing anything that to disturb the earth.
Right. Yeah, it seems like there ought to be a balance struck between the science concerns and the safety concerns, and it just seemed like the producers or the owners of the ranches were unwilling to make those kinds of compromises.
Yeah, but I think to find the real answers, you really have to go and you have to do those things. You have to dig up, and you have to figure out. You have to pull back all of the hidden things and to see what's underneath.
Yeah. So speaking of the science concerns, so you're involved in a project called the 100-Year Starship program.
That was something a few years ago. Yes, that's correct.
What is that? What does that mean? Is that like you're sending you want to create a starship that'll last 100 years? Is that what it is?
No. So I think it was about 4 years ago or 5 years ago, there was the person that was, I forgot. I'm embarrassed, but I forgot her name on Star Trek. Uhura. I forgot her name.
Oh, Nichelle Nichols.
Yeah. Nichelle Nichols. I'm sorry. Went to NASA, and she got some funding, and she said to NASA, "Look, I want to be able to start today, and within 100 years, I want to leave the planet and I want to go to another place. What do we have to do in order to do that?" all the technology. So let's figure this out. We got to need engines. We need structure. We need clothing. We need food. We need this. So she started this amazing endeavor to say within 100 years, we're going to step foot on another planet or another, not just the moon or Mars, or, something outside of our solar system. They said, what do we have to do that? So they had a couple conferences, they had a bunch of papers published and things like that. And Hal Puthoff was where I worked at the Institute of Advanced Studies in Austin, was deeply involved in that. And we published some papers and we looked at some of the propulsions and, of course, everything is exotic propulsions and exotic clothing and exotic this, because, it has to last and it has to be re-engineered and, from what we are established here today. There's no clothing stores and out there. So that was an amazing thing. And, Michelle was like this, and she headed up the whole thing. It's actually really well taken. And to this day, there's still that is still ongoing.
Oh, that's nice. So you can't just throw on a Led Zeppelin tee and head out into space, is what you're saying.
No. Yeah. So actually it was very interesting to see all the little things that you don't even think about. That, how do you grow things? How do you with the human waste and then the big thing, of course, power sources, all the radiation that you would get. How do you protect yourself? So, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So does that? So we've been watching the Artemis project trying to get off the ground and the launches keep getting scrubbed. How does the Artemis project fit into this? Is that a separate idea, separate deal?
Yeah, I think it's a separate thing, but I would imagine that what Michelle did was the impetus for all of these things to start generating. So, it takes somebody with a really cool idea to spark ideas in other people. Yeah. So, maybe she did, but I think that she set the stage for how all this stuff was going to come about.
What did you find was the biggest struggle with trying to figure out what? So you think was it the rocket? Is the power source, or do you consider it equal, or was there one that's just top of the list that you're just like?
It's the incredible amount of energy that you need in order to get the craft to travel enough distance, so in somebody's lifetime, you can get to wherever you want to go. So we just don't have that right now. So that's something that I worked on when I was at the Institute. Can we harvest energies from what we call the vacuum, the quantum vacuum, or is there something out there that I have? If there's some energies out there that out in the space that we can harvest to get there, nuclear energy or what have you.
And, I imagine a lot of that research is probably protected by NDAs and what have you, but were you able to reach any sort of, flag planted in the dirt to say, hey, we did what our particular job was? Or is it something that, it's going to be taking many generations of people to figure out the answers to these problems?
So I think that we did reach a milestone in our investigations where we said, look, it needs an incredible amount of energy. Let's say that you want to travel somewhere close to the speed of light, which is the velocity that you'd have to obtain in order to get get out of here and go do something within a lifetime. So if you do that, if you have that energy to make that happen. So the energy that you need to make that happen is we postulated that it was something that is available, what we call in the quantum vacuum. I don't know if you ever heard of that. It's like all around us, there's this space, and there's energy within the space, and it has infinite amount of energy in every little tiny infinitesimal spot that you can extract. So we were able to figure out that we could do something like that. We were able to get some energy out of there. Not very much, but it was more than zero. And I think that was a major milestone to say, look, if we can get a little bit more than zero, then maybe in a year from now, we'll be a little bit smarter and get a little bit more. And that's how things evolve, right? Once you take that first step, you do something to make it so it's believable, and then you start advancing your technology in order to extract that.
So you're trying to juice the universe for its energy.
Actually, that's exactly right. There's a lot of energy out there. There's mass is energy. I mean, we are energy. If we converted all of our energy, all of our mass to energy, it's an enormous amount of energy.
I don't even know how you begin to extract that kind of energy. Is that what the vacuum polarization is, or the?
That's exactly what it is. Yeah, that whole idea of trying to get this whole vacuum where you have it basically is what we live in. It's how all of our atoms get held together, and how it's all how our electrons don't fly out, when they're orbiting, things like that. So yeah, it's a very tough problem, and there's a lot of cool scientists trying to figure out how to do it.
That's fascinating. So it's been a few years since you were involved in that project.
Mm-hmm.
And so what is it you're researching or developing now?
So right now I'm more in the data science. So I've gone from that to more in the medical field. So a lot of the things that I do now is trying to take data that we've accumulated over the years to solve some of the tougher medical problems. And one of the interesting projects that we just finished is that there's a very high rate of hearts that get donor hearts from unfortunate infants that die suddenly, that have hearts to donate, and they end up being thrown away because there's no matching to recipients that might be out there. So the team that I was on, we did a project where we used data science or artificial intelligence to do this matching, where we can take any donor and match it very, very quickly with any recipient. So the 40% of the hearts that get thrown out in this country it's very potentially could be all used. So that's what I do now. I mean, so a lot of things like that, using AI to solve some of the really hard medical problems, and that's what I do. That was just an example.
Well, that's really, really fascinating.
Yeah, that's incredible.
That's a great.
It was a great project because I knew it had a really happy ending.
Yeah, you're saving lives. That's fantastic.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, so that's a really challenging project. It sounds like you're having to network with all kinds of medical databases in order to create an AI that will be able to access them and kind of match these things up.
Yeah, and so that's a challenging part, right? You can grab all this data, throw it into an AI model, and once you get all that in, you make some really cool decisions, and that's what we got to the point we can do.
A lot of times people, in these development of these different devices, I feel like accidental discoveries are made along the way. Have you ever had any accidental applications from any of your work?
I guess there probably is lots of different things that have come out of the things that I've done. I mean, if you go back to, aside from the fact that I do work in AI now, I do spend some of my time working on, the paranormal, or not the paranormal, but the trying to solve the problems in the Uinta Basin and things like that. So one of the interesting things that did come out is that a lot of the injuries that I've investigated over the past actually line up very, very nicely with what, I don't know if you guys have heard of this Havana syndrome. So it turns out that since, I guess, 2016, when I started looking at a lot of these injuries that were happening, and then later on, when the Havana syndrome became a little bit more popular and a little bit more well documented, what I realized is that what I've been analyzing all the time are cases of Havana syndrome that really were never reported. So you might say, well, and then of course I developed a lot of instrumentation and a lot of knowledge about how to interact with people or how to investigate people that have this syndrome. So you could say, well, that was quite a surprise because you don't really get that. So that when the papers were finally published by the scientific journals about the Havana syndrome, you look at those and you say, wow, I've been doing this all along. I really never realized it. But we have some very particular cases, and we have a lot of very interesting information about that.
Well, yeah. So Havana syndrome, they're still trying to pin down causes of that, right? But
that's correct, right?
There's some theories that it might be a microwave emitter or some sort of radiation gun or something like that.
Yeah. So what they had originally said when it first happened, they said, well, maybe it's a sonic. It was, I guess, there was a group of people that said, okay, it must be a sonic because it was affecting people's ears. They got these immense headaches and things like that. So what then transpired was, okay, they said, okay, well, afterwards they looked at it and they did some MRI scans and they noticed that there was some deep brain damage. And you can't really do that with sonic. Then they switched gears. They said, well, maybe it was more radiation based, maybe in the upper radiation, in the X-ray or in the gamma. And then later on, they said, after the investigations were over, they dropped it down into, was it a microwave thing? So right now it's kind of in the microwave. But what's interesting is that the people that we were investigating, people that had been in the Uinta Basin or had been in areas where a lot of this stuff is happening, we instrumented those people and found out that we were getting, every once in a while, we were getting these very, very large microwave spikes. The kind of microwave spikes that there's no way that it came from any household devices or anything like that. It had to be something that was generated by a pretty serious machine, like something either up in the air, maybe a drone that was able to do like almost an EMP type of thing. So we were recording these, and subsequently, when we did record these very large spikes, people were complaining that those particular people were complaining that they had severe headaches, they had nosebleeds, they had tinnitus, they had this incredible 10 out of 10 headaches.
Wow.
So we were correlating all this data. So that to me was like the biggest surprise, that we had some patients that were actually part of that whole Havana syndrome study, and they never even knew it.
That's wild, man. That's also really weird stuff, right? It's like,
yeah,
into some really weird and kind of dark territory, really.
So I guess there's a speculation that it only happens at government consulates. Maybe there was something in China had happened, and it also happened in Havana, obviously, but it's happening all over the country now. So there's like over 300 cases, verified cases of this Havana syndrome. We have like 3 patients that were in that group that we monitor continuously.
That's really kind of chilling.
It is, yeah. Right. And then they actually have these pulses come in. Every couple of weeks they will get, randomly they would get these pulses. And then when they do happen, of course the people don't really know the pulses are happening. They are, unfortunately, we're the best scientific instruments ever, right? Because our bodies have so many sensors in them. But we're the worst reporters of incidents because we have such an imagination. So that's why we put the instruments there alongside them. So when they say, "Oh man, I really had a bad day. My head was pounding. I had a migraine or whatever," we look at the data and say, "Oh yeah, there was a spike right around when you said you had this happen to you."
Oh, geez, those poor people.
Yeah.
So when you say pulse, like that means that they get a pulse of it, and then all of a sudden their ears are ringing, they're getting their headache, the fatigue's coming.
That's exactly right. But what's weird about it is that you can have somebody they would have somebody standing next to them, maybe 10 feet away, that wouldn't get it. So whatever it is very focused. It's something that is, gone through some phased array or something like that allows that beam to be very focused and very, very fast. It's over in less than a millisecond. So, and it screams like, is this a surveillance device, or is this, why? All we're doing is we're trying to figure out what the signal is. We still don't know why the signal's coming up. Is it coming from off planet? Is it coming from some a satellite, from a drone? But at least right now we know what the signals look like, and we know how to look for them and almost predict them.
That is just that's kind of terrifying, man. You just
it is.
Is it coming from? You said it's coming from above, like like a laser beam shooting down.
So sometimes, yeah. So what we do is we triangulate. Sometimes we're able to triangulate to the point where we know it's coming Sometimes it's coming, maybe from 30 to 90 degrees, something like that.
Okay.
Because when it hits their head, it's always hitting at the top. It's always entering in the top of it. It's never going, it's never coming this way.
Right.
There's different parts of your brain get activated. There's a lot of protection down here, but there's a little, as you get up in the cerebral cortex up here, there's less protection. So we know it's coming up from above. So when the people ask me, I said, well, is it possible that there's something under the ground and, making these things? I say, it's not very likely because of that particular frequency doesn't travel through the earth very well.
Yeah.
But it travels through the air really well.
Right. Do you think it's something that it's a part of somebody's makeup that makes it more accessible to it?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I work with a forensic neurologist and who's actually really, really good at this. And one of his theories was that it was genetically. So there's a genetic. People have a genetic. I don't even know how to
like a
classify. Yeah, maybe predisposition. They have a certain makeup that gives them a little bit more ability to sense these things. Like I said, you might have somebody standing right next to you that doesn't even feel anything, but you might have this person that says, wow, did you feel that? That was amazing. And then you look at the DNA of these people and you might say to them, that they have certain parts of their DNA that might correspond to other people that have this. So I think so. And I without really getting deep into it, there's certain nationalities that or groups of people that are more susceptible. We find that Native Americans are very, very sensitive to this stuff. It's like incredibly sensitive to this stuff. Then you have to beg the question: is it part of their makeup? Is it part of what they do, or is it just they are more open because they're very, very sensitive religious people? Maybe it's that part of it, but I think you're right. It's different people react in different ways.
Interesting.
Okay. So back onto Skinwalker Ranch. That's kind of where we became familiar with you.
Sure.
One of the questions that I know I've had, Kyle and I have talked about is, was there really a guy at Skinwalker Ranch that everyone called Dragon?
So yeah, Dragon was, so he was a security guy. He was the owner's very good friend. And so I guess when the producers met Dragon, or met his name, it wasn't Dragon, but when they met his personality, it says, we're gonna, it's a reality show. When I first signed up for the show, I didn't realize it was a reality show. So reality shows need
in the writer
drama.
on your contract, you're going to be required to call a grown man Dragon.
Yep. So they needed drama. So he was perfect.
That's funny.
Did you hesitate every time you said Dragon?
So I didn't. I called him Brian. I called him by his first name.
Okay.
He's a super nice guy, though.
Yeah, I'm sure his wife and kids don't call him Dragon.
No, he comes off really mean, but he's really, really nice.
That's great. So you were called in to tell us how you got called in to be a part of Skinwalker Ranch.
So as I said, I investigated a injury that might have happened in the vicinity of the ranch.
I see. Yeah.
During that time, I spent a lot of time working with the people that are on the ranch, interviewing them, doing some research, instrumenting, worked with the owner and things like that. When the show came up, I guess when history approached them to have this show, they needed a scientist to be part of the show, and they asked me to do it because I was, doing a lot of research anyway.
Yeah.
And then they brought Travis on because he was a very experienced show guy.
Right.
So they brought Travis, and Travis and I worked really well together on the ranch, and we did a lot of cool things, and that were never published. And we did a lot of experiments that never actually came close to the show, but we actually found some very interesting things out that that I use to this day, and for information.
Yeah, I'll say that as far as like the science content on the show, it seemed like a lot of it was just, hey, let's blow something up real quick.
Yep. Yeah, that's
So
so.
you and Travis being serious scientists, you must have had some input that went beyond, yeah, let's just go blow something up, or let's just go walk over here and take some pictures. There was like an animal attack that was like poorly filmed, and did that have an impact on how you felt the science was done on the show?
Yeah, so I mean, the science approach is to you have a hypothesis and you invent or you create experiments to prove or disprove this hypothesis. So that's what we did. We said, what we'd really like to do is we like to get a balloon up in the air with some sensors on it to see, is the radiation getting bigger or smaller as you get farther from the planet, and that's perfect. And
Yeah.
then you go to the producers with that. They say, oh, that's pretty cool. I can show a balloon. I mean, people love that stuff. So that was great. But some of the other stuff was very difficult to convince the producers to do because it didn't have any showmanship. So, Travis and I were getting, it's frustrated to say, look, here's the hypothesis. We're saying that there's an excess of gamma radiation at times hitting this part of the planet, and that's what's causing a lot of the thing. That's a hypothesis. How do you prove that? Well, you put gamma ray sensors, and you have sensors all over the place, and you record those over periods of time, and you look for these spikes. Unfortunately, that's not so showy. It's very difficult for people to wrap their heads around gamma, right? I mean, it's like, what the hell are you talking about? So that never made the show. But those, in fact, things that we actually did, and we found out there's a lot of, at times, there's a whole bunch of gamma coming down, incident on that part of the Uinta Basin, unexplained. We have no idea why it's happening. Is there something passing over our heads that has a sensor that's outputting a lot of gamma? I don't know, maybe. But we never actually got to that point to do that. But later on, now that I'm not associated with that and kind of looking more at the Uinta Basin in general, I started doing things like that, and that's basically the track that I was on afterwards.
So that's one of the things that's like really hard to pin down about Skinwalker Ranch is all of these things are happening on this little piece of property. I mean, it's a decent sized property, but it's not the whole basin.
No, the basin is huge
And
compared to that.
Those types of activities aren't happening in that whole area. They're just kind of focused in that particular area. And the question is, well, why Skinwalker Ranch and not up the road?
Well, that's a good question. What happened is that after the show, I met a lot of people during that whole thing that were in the basin, and they came to me and says, I live over here, and I get exactly the same thing. We've had mutilations. We had, I get these incredible headaches. I get nosebleeds. So I said, oh, that's interesting. Okay, so I started looking at those cases, and it comes to find out that if you look at the Uinta Basin, Skinwalker Ranch is kind of in the bottom of the Uinta Basin, but way up top, you have the Uinta Canyons. The closer you get to the canyons, the more densely concentrated are the interactions with this phenomenon. You get people that would have like incredible interactions, like to the point where they start seeing things, or they start seeing orbs. They take a lot of UFO sightings. So I have hundreds of pictures of UFOs that people send me that I actually have equipment with, where they say, I was sitting inside. I had this incredible headache. The dog started barking. I went outside. I looked up, and I saw this craft, and I took a picture of the craft. And then I look at that exact moment. I look at the instrumentation that's in their house, and I find out there's this big spike of energy that can't be caused by anything that they went to Home Depot and bought. This
Right.
is something came from the outside and must have done something. So Skinwalker Ranch is great, and it has a lot of publicity, but people have to realize that this occurrences happen all over the Uinta Basin, and it's more prevalent up towards the Uinta Canyon.
Oh, I see. So Skinwalker Ranch is the sizzle, but the steak is somewhere else.
I think, well, yeah, but all due respect to Skinwalker Ranch, they're the ones that actually drew the attention to the area. So, good for them. I mean, people need to understand this stuff, and they need to know that they're not crazy. I mean, you would think about this. You're sitting in your home, you're getting these incredible headaches. You have no explanation for it. At least what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give these people a little piece to say, you're not crazy. Okay, I understand you're seeing these things. Well, a lot of other people are seeing these things. So you're not completely crazy.
And they're actually taking pictures of stuff. So it's not just,
Yeah,
it's not
we
just
have
like,
lots. Yeah.
like, you might have like a nerve trigger or firing like an optic nerve from some random beam, right? You might have some radiation that triggers a nerve. Is that possible?
So yeah, actually the brain is very, very interesting. So during my postdocs, I worked in a radiation oncology area where they were giving people a radiation to cure cancers and lesions in their head or whatever. And what would happen is that a lot of times the people that were getting treatments would come out of the treatments saying, look, I was in there and you guys were out here having a party. I smelled pizza. I heard people screaming and laughing. And of course there wasn't. So what's happening is that radiation is entering your body. It's triggering things, right? Because it actually has the ability to trigger these things. And your brain is very, very complex. So one little trigger, one little action potential that gets fired that is kind of out of the ordinary can trigger something. They would smell pizza, or they hear you laughing, or whatever. They might hallucinate a little bit, and that's a very typical thing when radiation is incident on somebody's head. Low level, of course. I mean, this is nothing that is death. This is not something that would kill anybody, but a little bit of radiation could actually start causing hallucinations or start feeling things. And that's what we bank on. We say, look, if you do feel something, don't be afraid to tell us. So we can then correlate that with something that's happening in the environment. And then, and then the dogs start barking. The dogs happen to be some of the best sensors as well, because they will react to everything. So, I have maybe 200 or 300 anecdotal recordings of incidents that people have had in the Uinta Basin, and sometimes they say, what prompted everything is I heard the dogs barking. I went outside, and I looked up in the sky, and there it was. It was this thing floating across. So
200 to 300 accounts like that.
Yeah, so we have several devices out in the Uinta Basin.
I mean, that's got to have a lot of statistical significance. It goes beyond anecdotal, right? Because there's not that many people in the Uinta Basin.
Well, yeah. So right now, I don't know if you're familiar with this whole concept of, when you like sigmas, like I guess they did the Higgs boson up to 6 sigma or something like that. So right now we've got like 4 or 5 terabytes worth of data we've brought down from. This is just recording data, and then we have I think over 300 anecdotal incidences that we've timestamped and married to that. So we can almost predict to within almost 4 sigma when an incident's going to happen. That's how much data we have collected. That's kind of crazy, right? I mean, so it's not. I mean, 4 sigma is not that great. It's really not that great. So what we're trying to do now, of course, is to get more devices and things like that. But 4 sigma is not bad. It's more than 0, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So sigma is like a standard deviation, right?
It's how far off of my? Yes, exactly right. That's So a 6 is really, really,
really
tough.
tough.
If you're a 6 sigma, you're good. It's 90, 99 or whatever. Some ridiculous number. But we can say that as soon as we get a certain, so we have over a period of time, over a period of 4 days, if certain things happen, fall into place, our models say, okay, something's going to happen right about, within this time frame, something's going to happen. And then sure enough, people say, oh, by the way, I woke up in the middle of the night and I saw this entity flying across the room. Now, it might not have been an entity, but it might have been something that got triggered to think that it was an entity.
And how are these people reaching out to you? How are you getting the data? Signs up next to the We Buy Houses guys. Or...
So a lot of it's word of mouth, people that actually become participants in our study. And I have a web page, and I could actually show you all that stuff. And
what is it?
Give you, it's not a public website. Oh, no, this is not. This is all private. This kind of borders on the HIPAA.
Got it.
Because they actually put in real medical data and stuff. But I can share screen at some other point. And I can show you some of the stuff that we do. Actually, I have a sanitized presentation that I could send you guys that if you could include or give out to your viewers that actually shows the equipment used and some of the crazy signals that we've gotten and 2 case studies. I could send it to you afterwards.
Fantastic. We'd love
But
that.
anyway, so it was all word of mouth. I met a few people that had injuries, and these are all people that have injuries that they went to the hospital. They had, their attending physicians said, I'm going to cure you with doing some normal things, but I really don't know what the hell happened to you. So they would come back to us and say, I don't know what happened to me, but I had, incredible pain for 3 days, and they gave me some antibiotics, and it finally went away. So these are all verified. Something happened to these people through some medical reports. So we would instrument those people, and then they have a website that they go to that they put in like a daily anecdote to say, look, today I had a great day, very euphoric, or I went hiking up into the Uinta Canyon. This is one of the things. I brought back a piece of crystal, and I brought it back to my house, and then ever since then, things have been going crazy. I've had lots of premonitions. I've had lots of headaches. I feel terrible. And I went and I brought the crystal back, and everything returned back to normal. Now, I'm not saying that actually is a real thing, but they feel this. So then I say, okay, well, if they're feeling that, is anything happening with the signals in the environment that would induce those kind of things?
Yeah.
That again, that's a scientific method. People report something. Now I'm trying to marry that with something that I can read with a scientific instrument, and that gives credibility to what they're saying.
Yeah.
Of course, sometimes it's, you say, okay, well, that's interesting, but it doesn't correlate to anything. Not that I don't believe you, but that's one of those things that gets pushed off, and I'm not going to really include that in my data, or it gets included in the data, but it has a very low weight.
Yeah.
So with those spikes that you're talking about, is that when you would notice like your guys' equipment draining, your cell phone's going dead, or was that like just like random?
No, so that's actually a really good point. So there's people that have replaced all their appliances over the past 2 years. There's people that have to get new phones every 6 months. There's people that they're constantly complaining that their car is just all of a sudden stopping. Then unfortunately, a lot of the things, they don't use it in a mobile sense. So once they leave the domain where they have this instrument, I can't really record anything, unfortunately. So we're working on that. But when they're home or when they're in the place that they have these devices, at least at that point, I can correlate the stuff that they're doing. But yeah, I mean, it's like, in fact, on the show, they had a lot of problems with the cameramen. You think about all that sophisticated equipment, I kind of felt bad for them. I mean, SD cards would get whacked. I mean, SD cards never get erased, right? I mean, they're the most reliable things. They had a drone, a DJI drone that they brought that works perfect every time. They brought it there, it stopped working. And it was like verifiable. I'm standing there saying, I don't know. I've never had anything like that happen to me.
I did wonder that a lot watching the show. I was like, how come the camera guy's batteries don't go dead?
And they did a lot. But it's like, and they actually planned for that. So they always have like batteries back at the, some place that's kind of out of the way. So they did kind of plan for that. A lot of that stuff was in the first season, I know, was not made up. I mean, with Travis, definitely got hit with radiation. There's no question about it.
Mm-hmm.
He went to the doctor, and I saw all of the medical records and things like that. So
yeah, because he was pretty. Yeah, that hit him hard.
Yeah, so he ended up for 2 days. I mean, he had all the symptoms of, like I said, I worked in an oncology area I did my postdoc there for like 2 years, and all the things that people that had gone under radiation therapy, all the symptoms that they would have afterwards, Travis had very similar ones.
Nausea, hair loss, that kind of thing.
Yeah, discolored the whole thing. Yeah, and then he would get lesions and things like that. Now, then the big question is, if he didn't if he didn't do this thing, if he didn't do these things, would that have happened? And I can't answer that question. So that's the big question mark. Did we just is this just a coincidental thing that it would have happened to him anyway? So there is still those questions that come up that
That's the Schrodinger's cat.
Something like that. Yeah.
So, is it radioactive materials in the soil? Is that what's happening, or is it some?
I don't think so. I don't think so because it's transient. Everything that happens in the basin is transient. So if you want to put an instrument, and that's one of the problems that we're having. If you put an instrument that, say you happen to read a very big spike at this particular time, you say, well, if that happens at this time, it should happen again. Well, these things are very, very random. Actually, not. I shouldn't say that. They're random to us because we don't know what the schedule is for these things. They might be unrandom to whoever is making these big pulses, but to us they're very random. And on the ranch they were very random. We would measure some gamma spikes. At some point in the time they say, okay, well, tomorrow I'm going to come back with much better equipment and I'm going to put it there and we're going to read some stuff. And of course it never happens. And just to go back a little bit, no, I spent a lot of time with Bob Bigelow's data. When he came back from the ranch, he had brought a lot of data. And that's how I originally got involved with Skinwalker Ranch, is that I was doing the analysis of his data. And one of his biggest complaints was he could never reliably say that something is going to happen. He was always surprised to them. So how do you design an experiment if you never know when this particular thing is going to happen? That was his biggest frustration.
There's probably not enough sensors and devices that you can put down even in the trunk of that basin to actually start to get some kind of rhythmic type of timeline of what's going on.
Right. And the ranch is so big that he would focus on one area and then the phenomena would end up being some other place. It would, some equipment would go down, or somebody would get hurt in another spot that that they didn't understand what had happened.
So a lot of times in scientific experience, you'll have certain assumptions that you make, and one of those could be, let's assume that it's not random, but that it's correlated to some living creature's biorhythm or something like that.
Could be. Yep. Very likely.
And,
yep.
And how would you construct an experiment along those lines? If it's a craft that's showing up to maybe harvest some cattle through mutilations or whatever, you'd have to like sample the amount of cattle mutilations in the area and essentially the time frame that they would be happening. Is that what you would do?
Right. So we do that now. When I say that we can predict the occurrence of this thing, is the reason is because I have four years of history now of sensor readings. So one of the interesting ones that kind of stand out is that when this one particular device has a very small shift in one of the sensors, being the magnetic sensor, which is a gravity sensor, right? Detecting gravity. Every once in a while, we'll get a jiggle in the gravity sensor, but 3 or 4 days later, they'll get this big spike. I mean, you could almost set your watch. So I have these programs that go through and look at all this data. Every once in a while, when the gravity vector wiggles a little bit, probably 30 or 40% of the time in 4 days, you'll get this big microwave spike, and then you won't hear of it for another month or so. So that's what we trigger on. And that's one of the things that in the model, it kind of looks for that little wiggle to predict that thing. So that's part of that whole sigma that I was talking about. So that's one particular instance. Now, that could be, I don't know, maybe that's when somebody's mother-in-law visits and their car puts out this particular frequency. I don't know.
That's a big mother-in-law.
Yeah, it's a big mother-in-law.
If she's triggering gravity sensors, that's a big mother-in-law, man.
Yeah, she has an orbit. Yeah. So what it physically is, I don't know, but I know right now that once that little jiggle happens, that probably 4 times out of 10, I know there's a spike coming, and then I can predict this person is going to put an anecdote that says, "Man, I woke up with this enormous headache in the morning." So physically what it is, I have no idea, because I'm not physically there, but we're getting to the point now. So now if I can predict this, that's the whole deal. If I can predict it, then I can design an experiment that can further understand what that little jiggle's from and then see what that big spike is from. But until that time, I had no idea. I mean, you don't even know where to put your instrument.
Yeah.
So like I said, science is an incremental process, and you have to do little steps at a time and, just go down that road.
Do you go out there and visit often now, or since the data is being reported back to you, you don't have to go out there as much?
So I go out there for conferences. I'm going to go out there soon. I'm involved with, I don't know if you've heard this. So there's another show called Blind Frog Ranch. I don't know if you heard of that.
No.
Oh, it's another show. It's on Discovery. So I'm involved in that ranch. It's about 10 miles from Skinwalker. It's a little bit north. It's more towards the canyon. So it gets a lot more activity. So we're actually instrumenting that property to look for these anomalies, and they get very, very similar things happening in that property.
So when you lay out your array of instruments, are you spreading a wide net, or do you like to focus in particular areas?
So we were focusing on a particular areas to start off with, and then we started to realize that it was more, and then we started getting more participants. So right now we've got, well, when I say a lot, I mean we're only talking about 32 devices that maybe 28 are active. Some of them are just the seasonal ones that only come out like in the summertime or something like that. But I have them close enough so I actually see cascades of pulses going from one to another over, I think the closest ones we have is like 2 miles, and the farthest one are maybe like 40, 50 miles. But there are some of them that are spaced, so I can actually see. I know that if this guy gets a spike over there, within a few seconds, this guy's going to spike. I mean, these are very, very small spikes. I mean, they're not these big spikes. So when you get a little jiggle over here, you're going to get a little jiggle over here. So whatever it is, it's actually, and I hear these words, ley lines. You ever hear the term ley lines?
Sure.
I know that's kind of a, I don't know, pseudoscience type of indication, but it almost seems like there's this energy flow that goes and it's kind of pinging my instruments as it goes flowing across the Uinta Basin. Is it that? I don't know, but
does it go in a predictable direction, like north, south, east, west?
Yeah, so it's definitely east-west. It's definitely east-west. It actually goes across like if you have the canyons up top, it actually flows across the bottom and kind of zips down a little bit. But again, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Every time, that's just what it does. It doesn't. You don't get one. I wonder what makes it go that way.
You have to realize that there's probably a lot of different types of signals, but there's one particular signals that might ping a bunch of them. But there's some signals that just do one. There's some very focused ones, and some that seem to be more like a river, that go bing, 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 and then you'll see like this one going, and this one going. These are very, very minute things that you have to almost pull them out of the noise. But there's definitely there. They're statistically there. And then, you look at those and say, okay, well, that's very interesting. So what could cause something like that? Is it a seismic thing, or is it maybe there's a particular satellite that's going over the top that maybe is transmitting at some particular frequency or doing something to the particular sensor that's kind of mucking up the thing. So that's when you say, okay, well, that's interesting data. Now I could design an experiment that maybe I put one in a Faraday cage. And, then I say, okay, but it's in a Faraday cage. It really can't, and it does the same thing. Then it can't be, anyway, that's kind of the mindset that we're going through.
So Faraday cage is a way to isolate the.
That's right. Yes.
The electromagnetic either passing in or out of a certain membrane.
That's correct. It's like being in a right. It's like being in a submarine. Nothing. No electromagnetic energy would get in. So you couldn't use your cell phone. You couldn't use anything. So if it was electromagnetic in nature, if you put a Faraday cage around it, it wouldn't be sensitive to that. But if it was a gravity thing, an actual gravity thing, then gravity goes right through Faraday cages. If you had a little blip in your gravity, which is, if that is the case, then that is a major, major find.
Yeah.
We can't disturb gravity. Gravity is so stiff, we can't disturb it.
But that mother-in-law in the Uinta Basin.
Yeah, she's definitely capable. I apologize to all the mother-in-laws out there.
Oh man. Well, so it sounds like you're still doing a lot of work in that area.
Yes, absolutely, and that's the reason that they invite me to these conferences and things like that.
And so, regarding UFOs in that area, have you pinned anything down, or are you still scratching your head on that one too?
So, I'm not saying UFOs, so we wouldn't call it UAPs.
UAPs, okay.
Because what if? I mean, we don't know. I mean, what if there was some technology that was drone based or satellite based that has the ability to emanate these very large frequencies? We don't know that. I mean, there's speculation that for years and years since the 1950s, Russia's had these very, very high powered microwave transmitters for doing modifications of brain waves. I think the Army actually used a lot of microwave type of devices, and that's a public thing, public knowledge, to do communications with personnel on the battlefield, direct communication through microwave directly into the brain. They experimented with that, so we don't know. I mean, and that's not what I'm actually trying to. What I'm trying to do is pin down so I can predict it, and then I can put instruments to detect where the origin is. And I think that's the next step in our endeavor, is to, now that I can get kind of close to understanding where it's coming from and predicting when, then I can start understanding, where the hell is this stuff coming from?
Yeah.
It might be still a natural thing. Maybe it's a neutron star pulsating or something like that. Who knows?
Yeah, and I was thinking about that as we've been talking, and the problem with that is, like, how could it be so isolated to one region?
And focused, yeah. Like there's somebody standing next to you that doesn't receive that. So, you have to line up all your hypotheses, and you have to, figure out which one makes the most sense with the data available.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like the irony of it is the people who have studied the most and have the most kind of scientific background are probably the most uncertain about the origin of these things. We had a fellow on our show probably about a month ago, and he was absolutely certain that everything that anybody sees is from the U.S. government, and that you don't know what the government's got. This is what the government's got. He was absolutely certain. And he was a magazine guy. He just collected all the stories. He was doing, like you said, the anecdotal, just putting that out into a magazine for years and years and years. And he compiled all those stories into, a book eventually. But yeah, it seems like there's still a lot of questions surrounding Skinwalker Ranch and the source of those signals that you guys are picking up. And hopefully you guys can get to the bottom of it sooner rather than later, so that Travis doesn't get hit by any more radiation. He's still out there, right?
He's still there. Yeah, the show still goes on. Yeah, God bless him.
Yeah, we understand if you felt like you just couldn't call Brian Dragon anymore, done. You can't do it.
Yeah. So I think the show goes on. Bryant will still be Bryant, or Dragon will still be Dragon.
That's great. But you're doing a lot of good work. We appreciate the time that you spent coming on the show. Where can people see your stuff, and if they want to reach out to you to provide any information to you, how do they do that?
So I do have a Facebook. I think if they searched me on Facebook, the same way you guys found me, I think that is the way most people do. And then I respond to everybody pretty much, except the people that say you're crazy.
Who's telling you that? I'll call them myself. We'll take care of that.
So I think that's the best way to do it. They can get into some of the scientific journals. I'm publishing some papers with Travis on particular parts of the signals, and trying to put some science, wrap some science around them. They're kind of mathy, so maybe, but we don't really have anything for the general public. But I think that site has a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Well,
So I got one last question for you.
Shoot.
Since you're what did you think about us shooting that rocket into that asteroid? Do you think that's a good
do you know what he's talking
defense mechanism? Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, I'm sorry. I missed.
So earlier this week, there were 2 asteroids near Earth orbit, and one of them kind of orbits the other one. There's a larger one. I think it's called Didymus.
Oh, okay. I didn't even.
And
living in a hole somewhere.
And NASA launched a probe at the smaller one. I forget what it was called, but they launched a probe at the smaller one, and they fed. It was a live feed as it directly shot into this smaller asteroid.
Because they're trying to knock it off its trajectory so that it could change its course, and they're doing it to implement in case some
asteroid defense.
Yeah.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Wow. Did it work?
Yeah, definitely check that out.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm
fascinating.
going to. Yep.
Footage.
Very cool. Yeah. So unfortunately, I didn't hear about that.
You got your head in the dirt.
Yeah.
Tracking down mother-in-laws in the Uinta Basin, and forgot to check on old NASA, see how they were doing.
That's it.
Well, very good. We really appreciate you taking the time. And to our viewers, if you're wanting to check out more, it's Dr. Jim Segala. He's on Facebook. He's got a lot of work online as well. You guys can find, and you can also see him on season 1 of the Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, which is available on History Channel and also on Netflix. And as we wrap up the show,
and your other show that you're on.
I'm not on the show, so I'm just doing work for them. We're doing.
Oh, you're behind the scenes.
Yeah, behind the scenes. Yeah, that's where I want to be.
Yeah,
that's where the science. That's where the
behind
science
the camera.
Yeah, that's where the science is.
That's right.
Yep.
So until next time, keep on exploring the edges of the unknown.